What's going on, everybody? Anthony Cervino here with the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube channel with my top buy, sell, and hold players for NFL Week 12. Let's start with my buys, George Pickens, folks. And George Pickens, if you need a wide receiver down the stretch, now is the time to buy. He's given us at least 11.4 PPR points in 4 straight games. One of those games against the New York Giants in Week 8, only 11.4 PPR points, caught 4 or 5 targets for 74 yards. You have to remember, there was a big play called back that would have given us even more production coming out of the bye. He had 20.5 against Washington, 16.9 this week against Baltimore. He is being used, as I said, at least 5 targets in all 4 of those games. 2 of those games, he's had 9 and 12 opportunities. George Pickens, as we know, is a big play waiting to happen. And the great thing about George Pickens, in 2 of those games, he scored a touchdown. In the other 2, he's given us at least 74 yards. So we're getting a high floor player regardless. Down the stretch, the Pittsburgh Steelers, we know they're going to continue to run the football. But there are some tough matchups when it comes to running the football ahead for Pittsburgh. But when it comes to throwing the football, we know Russell Wilson is going to continue to throw and take those deep shots. There are a lot of terrific matchups. Cleveland 24th, Cincy 20th, Cleveland again 24th, Philly a little bit tougher, Baltimore 32nd, and Kansas City week 17. They're good, but they're regressing a little bit when it comes to passing on them. I love George Pickens down the stretch, and the good thing is that he didn't go off against Baltimore, and it was a smash matchup, and Pittsburgh didn't score a touchdown in that game. It was a Chris Boswell show. Fantasy managers may be afraid. They may think, hey, Russell Wilson turned back into a pumpkin. Maybe George Pickens isn't that good. Let me sell him while I can, which means it is your time to pounce. Next up, Garret WIlson. Garret Wilson's been one of the best fantasy football wideouts all season long. However, he has now given us back-to-back games with under 9.1 PPR points and under 8 targets, with a season-low 6 targets in Week 10. In fact, he's given us under 41 yards receiving in those games as well, without a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers looks a little bit shaky. However, they have their bye week this week. Garret Wilson fantasy managers, they might need a quality wide receiver to stick into their lineup, and Wilson is the player they are trying to sell, especially coming off of a couple of bad games. You can buy Garret Wilson, and I would buy him with confidence because coming out of the bye, there are some terrific matchups. Sure, week 14, you get Miami. That's a tough one. Week 17, you get Buffalo. It's another tough one. But there are 3 smash spots, week 13 against Seattle. And then the first 2 weeks of the fantasy playoffs, Jacksonville, 31st, the Rams, 22nd. Those are outstanding spots for Garret Wilson to go absolutely ballistic. And we know he has the skill set to exploit even the toughest of matchups. If there's a time to buy low on Garret Wilson, it's right now in his bye week, coming off of 2 bad outings. Let's go to a running back I want to buy, and that is Tyrone Tracy. And Tyrone Tracy's coming off of his bye week, but we know Tyrone Tracy has been terrific since taking over that backfield in week 5. In all but 2 games, he has given us at least 14 PPR points. He popped for over 22 PPR points twice. He has even given us 3 games over 103 yards rushing. And this is a bad Giants offense, a shaky offensive line without Andrew Thomas. And without Thomas, the passing game regressed. And Tyrone Tracy is still finding ways to get it done. He also scored 3 touchdowns in that time span. One of the best parts of Tracy's skill set is the fact that he is a converted wide receiver in college. So he is an outstanding pass catcher as well. And we have a quarterback change in New York to Tommy DeVito. That could mean more check down opportunities than he was getting with Daniel Jones. To date, Tracy's averaging roughly 12.5 touches per game, but that number isn't exactly true because that is taking consideration every game he played. Since week 5, Tyrone Tracy is well over 17 touches per game, getting used as a runner, getting used a little bit as a receiver. But again, with Tommy DeVito under center, we could see an uptick in pass catching opportunities. And he's explosive with the football in his hands. 16.8 broken tackle rate, 3.1 average yards after contact. And when it comes to rest of season schedule, Tampa, Dallas, New Orleans, tough one against Baltimore, and then Atlanta, Indy in the final 2 weeks of the fantasy playoffs. This is a nice run. And I'm going to keep mentioning it, the Tommy DeVito quarterback change. This impacts Tyrone Tracy not only as a receiver, but he could also be more dominant on the ground. They could look to emphasize Tyrone Tracy to take some additional pressure off of DeVito. I'm all in on Tyrone Tracy down the stretch. I don't think he's going to cost you an arm and a leg to get either. He could potentially be a fantasy football league winner at running back. Remember, folks, if you like content like this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the alert icon so you can be notified anytime we go live to answer your questions or when we drop videos just like this. If you have trade questions, if you have waiver wire questions, if you have start sit questions, ask them in the comment section below. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Now, let's go to players we are selling, and I am selling Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones, 4 straight games now, under 12.2 PPR points without a touchdown. This past week against Tennessee, albeit a tough matchup on paper, 16 touches for 43 yards, only 1 target. In fact, he's been under 3 targets in 2 out of his past 4 games. He was being used a lot earlier this season as a receiver out of the backfield. He had 3-game stretch with at least 5 targets. Those games are no longer coming. Sam Darnold looks a little bit shaky as well. And we also have to consider this is the year where aging running backs are popping off like Joe Mixon and Derrick Henry. Aaron Jones is 29, but it looks like down the stretch he is slowing down a little bit. And there's a guy named Cam Akers who has played at least 23 snaps since rejoining the Vikings. And last week, 37 snaps to Jones's 55. And Cam Akers last week, not only did he score a receiving touchdown, but he also had 12 touches to Jones's 16. The Vikings are still thinking playoffs, as they should. They could look to preserve Aaron Jones a little bit down the stretch. And there's a good enough rest of season schedule to where if we see a more balanced rushing attack, when it comes to usage between Akers and Jones, there's a world where where Aaron Jones is going to lose significant work to Cam Akers. I am selling Aaron Jones. He still has some name value. The schedule's good enough where running back needy opponents will try to buy him off of you. Sell him while you can. Next up, we are going to sell Kareem Hunt. The obvious reason why, Isaiah Pacheco. Now, the narrative you're going to tell your league mates when you're trying to trade him is the fact that, hey, Isaiah Pacheco, we don't know how healthy he is. And Kareem Hunt could also be used a lot down the stretch. Maybe it's a 50-50 workload split. Maybe it's a 60-40. But Kareem Hunt could see enough work to remain fantasy relevant. And there's always the chance that Pacheco re-injures himself. So there's some narratives to play off of when it comes to selling Kareem Hunt. The big one is that in week 12, which is expected to be the reemergence of Isaiah Pacheco, they get the Carolina Panthers. I don't see a world where Pacheco is getting the lion's share of the touches. I think they ease him in, which could mean one more big game from Kareem Hunt. Then they get the Raiders in week 13. There are 2 prime opportunities for Kareem Hunt to give us big fantasy numbers, which he has done every single game outside of last week against Buffalo. If you're selling Kareem Hunt, you're selling him on a narrative that he could retain some fantasy value. He could split the workload or at least see 40% of the touches. And he has two really good matchups ahead where you can still use him. But I am still out on Kareem Hunt because when it's all said and done, the Chiefs are playing for home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And the best running back in that backfield, once he's fully healthy and acclimated back into the offense from injury, will be Isaiah Pacheco. Let's go to the players we are holding. One is Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams coming off of his worst 3-game stretch of the year. We have to remember from weeks 1 to week 7, he has scored a touchdown every game. He even scored a receiving touchdown in week 8. That was an outstanding stretch, but it has come to a screeching halt. 3-game touchdown drought. In fact, he has at under 13.2 PPR points in those 3 games as well. Meanwhile, the Rams are getting healthier at receiver. We are seeing Kupp and Puka Nacua go off. We are seeing Matthew Stafford play terrific football, and I think it's coming to the liability of Kyren Williams. But we're not selling Kyren Williams. We're not buying Kyren Williams. If you're a Kyren Williams fantasy manager, we're holding tight. The reason why, there are some outstanding matchups where Kyren Williams should rejuvenate himself and go off. Philly's going to be tough, but weeks 13 to 15, New Orleans, Buffalo, San Francisco, then the fantasy championship, Arizona. Those are 4 prime opportunities where Kyren Williams can go absolutely ballistic. Don't be foolish. Don't sell Kyren Williams. We know that Sean McVay loves him. We know that he has 4 outstanding matchups to close out the year. And we know that when it's all said and done, Kyren Williams is going to produce for your fantasy team. The final sell is Nico Collins. Nico Collins finally came back on Monday Night Football against the Cowboys. On paper, mediocre production. 7 targets, only catching 4 for 54. Only 9.4 PPR points. And let's face it, that was a Joe Mixon game, and C.J. Stroud didn't exactly play his best football. In fact, C.J. Stroud, without Nico Collins, normally does not play his best football. He missed Nico Collins on one of those 2 targets as well. But what people don't remember, what people are going to forget, is that very early in that football game, Nico Collins broke a play, scored a 70-plus yard touchdown that was called back because of holding. That big playability for Nico Collins is still there, and that is a momentum killer. There's a case to be made that if that play connects, C.J. Stroud has confidence, the Cowboys defense is deflated, and C.J. Stroud is on his way to an outstanding passing day, and Nico Collins is on his way to another 100-yard receiving game. Don't panic sell on Nico Collins. If you're going to see the schedule, you see Tennessee, you see Miami on it, that's fine. They're tough matchups, but Nico Collins, as we know, he is an emerging receiver. You can make a case he's a top 5 receiver in the NFL. There are some guys where matchup doesn't really matter, and I think Nico Collins is one of them. Also on the schedule, you got Jacksonville, you got Baltimore in a fantasy championship. Those 2 games are enough for me to want to hold on to for Nico Collins and hope for the best, because last year's connection between C.J. Stroud and Collins, that wasn't an anomaly. We saw that happen earlier this season, and maybe in his 2nd game back, that special connection reemerges. Nico Collins has 3 100-yard games this season. Every game he played outside of the Dallas return, he's had at least 78 yards. He has 3 touchdowns. He is one of the best receivers in the NFL. Don't panic. Sell Nico Collins. We are holding on to him because he is going to help deliver us a fantasy football championship.